I will now present the main elements of my PhD dissertation, Imaginal Worldbuilding, Dementia and Family Caregiving in Pandemic Denmark, that I defended last year in October. The project is funded by Nordea Fonden and the Danish Alzheimer's Association. And while this PhD is externally funded, I have had complete freedom of research. So this is an overview of the presentation. I will set the scene by unfolding the metaphor of mooring poles. I will then introduce the context, the argument, the main theoretical inspirations, and my methodological approach. These also represent the dissertation's framing chapters. I will then give an overview of the dissertation structure and the 3 articles that are its analytical pillars. Finally, I will touch upon the main contributions. So, the cover image of my PhD dissertation is an image of mooring poles. These pillars, typically crafted from wood, secure boats in the water, preventing them from drifting out onto the open sea. At first glance, this may appear a strange choice for a dissertation on dementia care. However, the image of mooring poles illustrates an emic metaphor derived from conversations with an interlocutor, Ane, who cared for her sister, Sarah, who had dementia. And Ane said, "It is as if Sarah is on a boat on open water without being able to navigate the boat. So I make these mooring poles, fortøjningspæle in Danish, that keep her steady as she floats around in a universe of uncertainties that gets bigger and bigger. She does not know how to navigate her life anymore. There is no direction. This has been a central part of my life for many years. I think that is what people do not understand. What it does to you, because it does not stop. It does not decrease over time. It only gets worse." Anne was the only interlocutor who used the metaphor of mooring poles. However, as I worked with my ethnographical material, it became clear that this metaphor pointed to central themes that was at play more generally. Other interlocutors cared by mooring, by giving the person with dementia something to hold on to. However, this was hard work. I was surprised by how badly some interlocutors were doing. Encounters with people experiencing overwhelming exhaustion, debilitating memory loss, stress, deep sadness, and anxiety were not uncommon. Not all interlocutors experienced such severe consequences from their care work, but all were affected to some degree. So, family caregivers needed something to hold on to themselves, as to not spiral into despair. I noticed that creating metaphorical mooring poles facilitated an opening up of possibilities for care for the person with dementia. This is what this dissertation is about. How relatives of people with dementia care, what it does to them, and how I studied this. I focus on the relatives of people severely affected by dementia, living in Danish care homes. As I am sure this audience is aware, dementia is an umbrella term for several conditions characterized by changes in the brain that severely affect cognitive abilities. Yet, while dementia includes many losses, it does not necessarily include the loss of the ability to experience joy and connection. Recent anthropological studies focus on various ways it is possible to connect to and care for people with dementia, and to recognize that these individuals are much more than the losses they experience. My work is highly indebted to these studies. Most care homes in Denmark are public housing facilities financed and administrated by municipalities, which are local administrative units of the Danish state. As the Danish welfare state took shape during the 19th and 20th century, with ideas of tax-financed equal access to healthcare and social support, care was increasingly organized and financed by the state until almost all aspects of care were covered. In 2017, the Danish government introduced an action plan to increase family members' involvement in state-financed dementia care. Inclusion of relatives in care in Denmark is called pårørendeinddragelse. And this reform is part of a list of reforms that are changing the Danish care infrastructure by gradually redistributing care tasks and resources between public institutions and citizens. While including relatives has been proved very beneficial for people with dementia, this is not always the case for their relatives who experience lower mental and physical health and loss of their own social relations. The responsibilities of family caregivers are vaguely defined, and the role is unclear to both relatives, care home staff, and people with dementia. Support of family caregivers is part of the policy, though this is mainly directed towards people living with a person with dementia. Compared to most part of the world, the Danish care sector still provides more care, yet this is a striking change in the Danish welfare state's approach to care. So, while the Danish welfare state has historically taken on a significant amount of care work based on the ideological idea of lifelong equal access to care financed by one of the highest tax levels in the world, the care infrastructure is changing. Care work conducted by family caregivers include, for example, cleaning and helping with personal hygiene and eating, emotional and relational care work, which can be quite difficult, and contact with the care home, the healthcare system, and municipalities. These processes are often highly confusing. For example, one interlocutor said that she constantly ran into bureaucratical dead ends and felt left in darkness as she, quote, navigated a system that doesn't make sense, end of quote. Moreover, some family caregivers experience being alone or almost alone with all informal care work, as other family members chose or could not participate. Many caregivers thus experienced a sense of double withdrawal of the state and of their family. The people I talked to were severely affected by this double withdrawal. For example, Anne, who I just mentioned in the beginning on the metaphor of mooring poles, had worked as a graphic designer. When Sarah was diagnosed with dementia, she had gone part-time to take care of her. Later, she took leave of absence from her job. However, she eventually quit her job entirely, as Sarah's condition progressed slowly, suggesting she might need care for longer than Anne could take leave. Working while caring for Sarah meant that Anne had become very overwhelmed and experienced symptoms of stress. Besides caring for Sarah, Anne also cared for her adult daughter, who struggled with severe depression. And she had been caring for her mother, who had also had dementia, and who passed away just as Sarah was diagnosed with dementia. Anne could get by financially, as her husband earned enough to support both of them. Yet, Sarah suffered from epilepsy and severe distress as part of dementia, and Anne described cases of Sarah being held down by several healthcare workers, having accidentally hit her head against something during an epileptic seizure, accompanied by intense fear and confusion. She was taken to a psychiatric unit while screaming with blood and tears running down her face. Anne had been with her in the ambulance. During their severe episodes, Anne was the only person who could effectively calm Sarah down. Hence, the care home staff would call her to help. Besides everyday care, experiences like these impacted Anne greatly. Such memories, as well as worrying when and how this might happen again, occupied Anne's mind, and she had grown distant physically and emotionally from her husband and regretted not spending more time with her daughter. Moreover, she had lost contact with almost all of her friends and extended family. People disappear, she said, as she described how she was the only family member caring for Sarah. Moreover, all she could talk about, she said, was experiences related to Sarah, and other people get tired of hearing such stories, she said. Anne was also often too exhausted to engage in social activities. Other people told me similar stories. However, not everyone struggled to this degree, especially in families where several family members participated in providing care. While dementia not only entails losses, this is true for the relatives caring for people with dementia as well. They take action and find hope in creating change. What I found striking during fieldwork was the force with which family caregivers continued care under these challenging circumstances. I was interested in and found it essential to explore how they did so and what it did to them, mainly because this happened in the context of several other contingencies. One of these were COVID-19, as I conducted fieldwork at the height of the pandemic. Denmark went into lockdown, which initially meant that family members were suddenly not allowed to visit their relatives in care homes. This created a sense of urgency, as family caregivers were losing time with progressively ill family members. While most of the world kept in contact technologically, the use of telephones and video calls can be very difficult, if not impossible, for people in the more severe stages of dementia. The COVID lockdowns thus added an extra layer of distress to already difficult situations. While parts of the dissertation deal with the consequences of COVID directly, it seeks to reach beyond this context too, to make general claims about life in the context of cognitive differences. And so the central question of the dissertation is, how do relatives of people with dementia manage to keep caring in a demanding situation of multiple contingencies? The answer to this question has two layers, one ethnographic and one analytical. I have already alluded to the ethnographic layer by introducing the notion of mooring poles. In this context, a central element of care is creating something to hold on to, both for carers and cared for. To examine this analytically, I introduce the concept of imaginal worldbuilding. The overall argument of the dissertation is thus that relatives of people with dementia keep caring by building alternative worlds of care through mental images, through imaginal worldbuilding, and that studying this requires methodological developments that can capture such images. Imaginal means something made of or related to images. The stories interlocutors told me were often long and detailed, branching off in many directions. Storylines and narratives came together in clusters, pointing to interlocutors' mental images of how they thought care should and should not be conducted, and of a life without exhaustion. I draw on philosopher Chiara Bodici's definition of imaginal. The imaginal is disinterested in what is real and what is fiction, and is understood as an intermediate space that is neither material, like the world of pure sensibility, nor immaterial, like that of the intellect, but a place where the acting imagination operates. It is acting in the sense that it does not simply mirror the empirical world, but is instead endowed with the capacity to create one. While imagination and imaginaries are widely used concepts in anthropology and beyond, the imaginal is rarely used and thus remains underdeveloped. Part of what this dissertation offers is thus an anthropological engagement with the theorization of the imaginal. Furthermore, I draw on anthropologist and phenomenologist Jared Segan's approach to world building as the potential of becoming otherwise. You see the very Heidegger-inspired approach here, that begins from a situation that has become unbearable and proceeds to open up possibilities for what worlds can become and how existence can be. Because Bodici and Segan's analysis both reside on a more structural global scale, I have found inspiration in neighboring concepts such as the imagistic, world-open care, and poesis, most of which are phenomenologically inspired and help me to do an analysis on an interpersonal level in the context of structural change. Multiple contingencies and crises characterized the lives of the people I studied, yet they were also a premise for me as a field worker. While ethnographic fieldwork always has aspects of unpredictability, I started my PhD in February 2020, a couple of weeks before COVID came to Denmark. At first, fieldwork seemed impossible. While quite an obstacle initially, the pandemic also opened up for methodological reflection and innovation. I talked to interlocutors via telephone and video calls, for the most part, and encouraged them to send me diary entries, photographs, and video clips. The conversations, mainly by telephone, became my primary source of insight. In the dissertation, I describe 4 key ways my ethnographic presence were reconfigured. I will highlight the one I find most important. The family caregivers were, as mentioned, exhausted. Having someone visit could be just one more thing that would drain them. I wondered if engaging with them remotely made it possible to establish relations with a group of people who might have not chosen to participate had it required regular in-person meetings. However, gaining access to this group provided important insight into caregiver exhaustion in the stages where it becomes unbearable, which, as you know by now, became a central analytical focus. This also made me question the impact of the ethnographic gaze and the taken for granted truth in anthropology that physical proximity is the best way to create deep connections. In cases where neither the ethnographer nor the interlocutor lives with visual impairment, a given part of being together is seeing each other. Yet, for some, it can be vulnerable to be perceived. One interlocutor, for example, provided a vulnerable and valuable insight as to why she preferred telephone interviews. She said that she gained a significant amount of weight after starting caring for her mother with dementia, as she coped with stress and sadness by eating. She also told me that she did not have the time or energy to clean or tidy her apartment that had been messy for a very long time. She said that she was glad that we could meet on the phone, as she wanted to tell me her story, and often stressed that she was too ashamed to let me see her or her apartment, even on a video call, and even when COVID restrictions would allow it. She did invite me in the end, but it took a year to gain that kind of trust from her. So, the dissertation consists of 4 framing chapters, parts of which I have just introduced, as well as 3 academic articles that form the analytical backbone of the dissertation. And I will now turn to the articles. As I have worked on the articles parallel to each other, they are all in different stages of unpublished. There are different mental images at play. First, there are the images with which family caregivers endure exhaustion by building the potentialities for alternative worlds of care. These are images of how relatives think care should and should not be conducted. I deal with this in Article 1, Imaginal Worldbuilding. The article starts with the following vignette, derived from a conversation with the interlocutor, Dora. One day, when Dora was visiting her mother Ruth, she found her alone eating napkins in her care home apartment. At first, Dora thought her mother might have mistaken napkins for food. However, she realized that Ruth was desperately hungry as she ate most of the food Dora had brought for both of them. Ruth had dementia and had lost most of her ability to recognize objects and struggled to navigate a fork to her mouth. Care home staff rarely had time to support Ruth during mealtimes, so Dora often found Ruth alone and hungry. Dora said that she knew it was a matter of lack of time, not ill intent. However, she could not stand the thought of her mother starving, so she often came to the care home, among other things, to help Ruth eat. Dora and other interlocutors provided an abundance of similar descriptions and stories, and these were the kind of main type of material that I worked with. They also described how they tried to create changes by talking to care home staff and attempting to get family members to participate in care work. During fieldwork, I was presented with multiple images of how family caregivers thought care should not be conducted. However, the article explores the counterparts to these images. These existed latently as the other side of what was overtly expressed. These are images of families caring jointly and the state taking on a more active caregiver role. Throughout the article, these are brought forward to show how relatives use these images as driving forces to build an alternative world of care. And I would like to give an example of images of the state that I draw on in the article. Barbara, who is 35 when I meet her, took care of her father Bent, who is 81, who had dementia. And when I met her, she had recently quit her job and was on sick leave in the unemployment benefit system, as a doctor had assessed that she was showing symptoms of depression and stress. And her local job center, responsible for managing people in the unemployment benefit system, had started encouraging her to apply for jobs, even though her mental health had not improved. And Barbara lived with her partner Jakob. She used to be a fun and energetic girlfriend, she said, and she felt terrible that Jakob did not see that side of her anymore. She was almost always tired and sad now, she said, and struggled to remember things and had lost interest in her social life and her hobbies. Moreover, Barbara was undergoing fertility treatment, though she did not get pregnant during the time I followed her life. She told me that Jakob was frustrated with the amount of time that she spent with Bent. Jakob wanted her to attend to the future, as he said, which meant the home and the family they were building together, rather than being with what is in the past, which meant Bent. Barbara continuously tried to tend to her mental health, work situation, and family and romantic life. Yet she told me that she felt like she couldn't do any of it good enough. So, drawing on a visit to the care home where Bent lived, I turned the attention to world-building images of the Danish welfare state. I visited Bent and with Barbara at the care home where Bent lived a sunny spring day. When we entered Bent's room, he was sitting on a sofa. He was thin and his short grey hair was slightly disheveled. He just woke up, Barbara said, brushing his hair to the left with her fingers. We took our coats off and Bent told Barbara that he wanted to die. No, Dad, Barbara said, sitting down on the sofa beside him, hugging him sideways. He leaned his head on her shoulder. The room was bright, with big windows and wide walls. Most of the furniture was new. Barbara and Jakob had brought new furniture for Bent so he could enjoy the space more, but they had also included belongings Bent held dear to make the space more homely. A TV, a small wooden dining table, and 2 chairs was at one end of the room. A glass of juice had been spilled on the table and the liquid had dropped to the floor. It had dried out and large clusters of living and seemingly dead ants were stuck in there. At the other end of the room was a hospital bed. There were stains of blood on the white sheets. Above the bed was a large painting in a gold-colored frame of a sailing ship on troubled water. When I visited the restroom later, there were feces on the floor and the walls in several places. There was a stark contrast between the personalized, cozy, and carefully decorated space on one hand, and the feces, blood, and ants on the other hand. Barbara turned on a small CD player. Danish and American hits from the 1950s filled the room, and Bent moved his body quietly from side to side. He seemed calm and smiled a little. After listening to music for a while, a care worker brought in lunch for Bent. She also brought some pills that she pulverized with the back of a spoon and mixed with yogurt. She carefully fed it to Bent and offered comforting words as Bent's facial expression showed that the yogurt did not fully cover the taste of medicine. Barbara asked her about Ben's mood. She explained that he sometimes felt low, but was often also cheerful. Barbara then asked about the juice on the floor. "Oh yeah, I have seen it," she said. "I do not know why it hasn't been cleaned up. Of course it shouldn't be there. It has been there for days." She seemed generally apologetic, but also implied that it was not her responsibility to clean it up. Barbara agreed that in a friendly tone and asked about the blood on the bed sheets. The care worker said that Ben's foot had been bleeding slightly this morning. She did not know why. He might have accidentally hurt himself in his sleep. The care worker took some dirty towels from the bathroom and said goodbye. Barbara turned off the CD player and encouraged Ben to eat the open sandwiches in front of him. He ate slowly, while Barbara gently put a hand on his back. Barbara turned the TV on, and Ben looked at the screen, but seemed agitated. He closed his eyes. Barbara changed the channel a couple of times. "Look, Dad, this is a show about selling houses." Ben looked at her without a word, yet seemed increasingly agitated. "You do not want to watch TV, Dad?" Ben did not answer. "That's okay," Barbara said, turning towards him. Ben said, and looked at the floor. Barbara gently took his hand. She later explained to me that it made her sad that the sheets had not been changed and the juice had not been cleaned up, that Ben should live in such a place. She also said that she felt frustrated that Ben was sad and alone most of the time, and did not think that the care home staff knew how he was really doing. Even though some things were taken care of, Barbara did not know if the care home really cared for Ben, as she said. Barbara did what she could to better Ben's well-being. One approach might work for some time, for example, listening to music, while another might work in a particular moment, but not work in another day, for example, watching TV that Ben usually likes. Barbara described how she was often emotionally overwhelmed and physically tired after visiting Ben. Everything revolved around attuning to Ben's needs. While Barbara explained that she enjoyed spending time with Ben, especially when she managed to connect with him, navigating death wishes and ambiguous emotional expressions were challenging. Being exhausted from the practical, bureaucratical, and other types of care work, as well as the emotional work of redirecting and tending to a person's changing moods and needs were a common theme among my interlocutors. Moreover, Barbara was alone with this, as her mother and brother had decided not to engage in care work. Beyond despair, however, Barbara's account of what she thinks care should not be like reveals mental images of a state, here in form of a state-financed care home, which to her should and could act differently. These are images of a cleaner care home apartment, as well as images of Ben having company and being cared for in terms of emotional needs to a greater extent. Ultimately, what she perceives as better dementia care, where she can count on things being taken care of. Consequently, these are images of a world where Barbara is striving to build, where she does not have to live with debilitating and exhilarating exhaustion. Ben was given food and dirty towels were removed by care home staff. Essential things were taken care of to some degree. It was also evident from how the care worker talked to Ben and observed his mood that she tended to him the best she could. Both Barbara and the care home attempted to establish a world where Ben was cared for. However, while this world is constantly being created, phenomenon like blood-stained sheets, feces on bathroom tiles, and ants in day-old juice on the floor meant that it is also continually dissolving. However, contrary to images of the family, the images of the state seem to materialize, at least momentarily. These images of a caring state are thus not entirely fiction. Yet they are not completely real. Instead, they form a field of possibilities, following Bodici, through which family caregivers try to bridge the temporal gap between the painful present and their desired future, which, however, they rarely seem to reach. World building, according to Sigon, alludes to the interplay between deconstruction and experimental creativity. Such creativity, he says, however, should not be thought of as creating from nothing, but rather as the creative disclosure or the creative release of possibilities that already exist right here and now, but are covered over or trapped within or held back by what currently is. A different world of care is possible, as the intentions of caring well are there. Still, this world is trapped within, following Sigon, and held back from coming into existence by the present politically defined and directed conditions for care. While mental images of family and images of the state are similar in that they both facilitate endurance, they are also different in that images of the state were imbued with a greater sense of injustice. Interlocutors' view of family dynamics seemed more complex and unresolved. People can have various reasons for not contributing to care work, which family members expressed awareness of. And as it has historically been the state's responsibility, family caregivers did not express a sense of something having been taken from them, which they had been promised, as in the case of public changes of the care infrastructure. They expressed feelings of anger, frustration, disappointment, and even betrayal. They had contributed to the welfare state all their life through very high taxes. However, when needed, the state did not deliver as promised, the rationale seemed to be. Turning now to the second article and the mental images relatives evoke for the person with dementia and for themselves to care for them and connect with them. I explore these in the article Poesis of Care. I am inspired by Heidegger's notion of poesis as starting something on into its arrival, which has the potential to let what is not yet present arrive into presencing, facilitating a process of opening up to the world. As well as anthropologist and phenomenologist Robert de Chaillet's work on poesis as something connected to images in interpersonal relations of care. Poesis of care, as I coin it, is thus characterized by the bringing forth of caring moments that simultaneously moor and open up spaces amidst the multiple waves of unsettling unpredictability. The article deals with how relatives cared for people with dementia from a distance during COVID lockdowns. It examines the use of communication technologies, telephones and tablets, and argues that relatives care by evoking mental images of memories of life outside the care home for people with dementia, as well as images of life inside the care home for themselves. It thus demonstrates the relevance of exploring care as connecting to the world in a broader sense, beyond maintaining relationships with which the literature on caring across distances has primarily been concerned. For example, the interlocutor Karen described how she cared for her father, Johannes, with dementia. Johannes had almost lost all of the ability to speak, yet Karen still called him, as that was the only form of contact possible during lockdowns. Karen told me that she, quote, found a way of saying to him, "Hi, Dad, it's Karen. I'm calling you because I want to tell you something." Then I told him about some everyday occurrence. Just one thing. He would be very confused if I told him more than one thing. So it was just, "Listen, Dad, I've had a man come to the summer house today and dig up a big bush, something practical that he could relate to." And after that say, "Well, take care, Dad," because he could not really answer. So it was just a little story from my life, and then goodbye. End of quote. These images provide the person with dementia with something to hold on to, and work as mooring poles that open up the world and create possibilities of caring in a context where the world was otherwise closed down. Creating mooring poles also gave caregivers something to hold on to, meaning the possibility of caring. Finally, there are the images interlocutors provided me with, which allowed me to travel to and explore their experiential worlds across distances and the worlds they imagined could become. This is a topic for Article 3, Sonic Signatures. I take my point of departure in notions of signatures and imagistic signatures, developed in cognitive disability studies by anthropologists Taylor Swaney and Lone Grøn, respectively, with inspiration from phenomenology in Grøn's case, and defined as individual marks of being in the world. I propose the concept of sonic signatures. Sonic signatures are the subtle nuances of individuality conveyed through sound that form mental images. Sound-based images opened up the worlds of my interlocutors and became methodological mooring poles for me to hold on to. In the article, I thus argue that methods developed to study people with cognitive differences can benefit the anthropological methodological repertoire in general, no matter if the analytical focus is on people with or without cognitive differences, and no matter if this is studied remotely or in person. One of the examples I give derives from a visit to a woman I called Alma, who inspired the last part of the article, which deals with listening for mental images as a way to analytically discover horizons of other worlds. I would like to introduce you to this before moving to the dissertation's contributions. I take point of departure in an example of a woman with dementia, as I was inspired by this in listening to the relatives who I mainly talked to. So in 2018, Alma, who was 32 when I met her in 2021, moved into a care home in a suburb close to Copenhagen after having been diagnosed very young with a rare and aggressive combination of Alzheimer's disease and a little-known type of Parkinsonism. I visited her there a cold spring afternoon. After I had greeted the care home staff, I found Alma's room and knocked on the door. And Alma opened, and I said, "I'm Ida. I'm here to talk to you about the experiences of living here during the pandemic. I think your father might have mentioned this for you." "Yes," Alma said enthusiastically and let me in. I asked if I could sit on a chair, and Alma agreed and sat across from me. After Alma had closed the door, I noticed that her mood had changed significantly. "I think they want me gone," she said. "Do you know if they want me gone? I think they want to kill me. I think they're trying to kill me." She sounded sad, yet there were also an intensity and sense of urgency in her tone of voice, as if I might have an insight she did not have, which she urged me to share. I told her that my impression was that the staff were there to care for her, not to hurt her. She then told me that she wanted to die, that life like this was not worth living, that she was of no use. She continued by telling me that she did not know how to end her life, but she was trying to figure it out. She sounded frustrated yet determined, and was speaking and breathing fast, again with a sadness and sense of urgency, as if she, beyond sharing her thoughts and feelings, was looking for a solution. I paused and said, "It must be very difficult," and she nodded. I felt uncomfortable. There were a long pause. Her rapid breathing continued. Before meeting Alma, I had been told by relatives of people with dementia that it could be harmful to prompt questions on topics such as suicide, as it could make a person with dementia spiral down a path of depressive thought patterns, without being able to find their way out on their own, leaving them devastated and distraught. To respond carefully to Alma, I therefore decided to change the subject. I noticed a digital piano in the corner of Alma's room. "Do you play the piano?" I asked. "Yes," she said hesitantly, and I told her that I played the piano as a child. "I can play something for you, and then you can play something for me," she suggested. Her voice were fragile, yet slightly louder now. Relieved that this might redirect her from the topic of death, I agreed, nervously thinking that I had not played the piano in a very long time but might be able to improvise. She sat down and started playing chords that formed a beautiful melody I did not recognize. I found the melody neither happy nor sad, but poetically slow and calming. Time seemed to stand still, until it knocked on the door. A woman entered. "Joanna," Alma said. Her voice suddenly sounded surprisingly happy and much more robust than just a few minutes before. We greeted Joanna, who turned out to do creative activities with care home residents. I explained why I was there. "Joanna also plays the piano. We make songs together," Alma said, with a touch of anticipation. I asked, "Can we make a song about your experiences during the pandemic?" And Alma agreed. Joanna explained that the usual procedure was for Alma to suggest words and decide on a melody, which Joanna would then put together to lyrics so they could play and sing the song together at the piano. "Okay," I said as confidently as possible. "Love," Alma said, loud and enthusiastically. I was puzzled. Considering her contemplations on death, I had anticipated a word with more melancholic connotations. I asked Alma to elaborate. She explained that during lockdowns she could not see her son. Her son, Johan, who was 5, lived with his father, Tom, who had separated from Alma after her dementia diagnosis, and her grandfather, Alma's father, Axel, 1 week at a time. Axel and Johan often visited Alma. However, COVID lockdowns had put a stop to that for a while. Not being able to see Johan had made Alma's love for him more apparent, she said, and she missed him dearly. This led to a conversation on love and longing, the difficulties of distancing from family members, and the joy of reuniting. After a while, I asked her for one more word and then to elaborate. With each word followed an explanation, in some cases long, and in some cases just a sentence or two. Alma struggled slightly, but not much, with verbal expression. I gave her time to find the right words by pausing and just waiting and listening to make her feel comfortable and safe, as well as to notice how and when she changed the topic or stopped speaking for a moment. The list of words grew and ended up consisting of love, coronavirus, understanding, lack of understanding, danger, media, society or culture, the economy, and loss of human lives. Alma's interest in politics and the world around her, which Axel had told me about, might have been part of her choice of words. I thanked her for the words and explanations, asked her which melody she wanted the song to be based on, and promised to come back with a song that we could sing and discuss together. She seemed keen on the idea and chose the melody for Under stjernerne på himlen, Under the Stars in the Sky, by Danish singer-songwriters Kjeld Haik and Tommy Sebak, a popular song in Denmark in the 1990s. It was originally a lullaby for Sebak's daughter and deals with the topic of parent-child love, and that it is always possible to be together in drømmelandet, in dreamland. After Tommy Sebak passed away, it was sung by his son, Rasmus Sebak, who made it very popular again in the 2010s, early 2010s. It was not until much later that I realized the correspondence between the lyrics and the history of the song and the topic of parent-child love, separation, and being together, which Alma had brought up. Shortly after visiting Alma, my fieldwork was interrupted by circumstances in my own life, including the loss of my father, and I did not see her again until 6 months later. By that time, her dementia had progressed and she was almost unable to speak, let alone sing or play the piano. I had made the song from her list of words and chosen melody and sang it for her. I asked her some yes and no questions so she could nod or shake her head, but she just smiled tiredly. As I visited Alma in person, there were several sensorial components to explore. Yet, in writing this account, I have focused on the auditorial aspects to highlight their potentialities. What happened shortly after I had arrived provided information on where Alma's mind was at initially, her concerns about death. Beyond her words, listening to her tone of voice and breathing revealed how the themes of death were present in her life. The urgency in her voice and her rapid breathing signaled a sense of both fear and impatience, as if she was eager to move both away from death, fearing that the care home staff wanted her gone, and towards death, wishing to find a way to end her life. It opened up nuances and various images of Alma's experience of the complex ambivalence that can be part of life with dementia. Words revealed some of this, but listening to the pace of her tone of voice and breathing highlighted the complex dual urgency of fear and striving towards being gone. It revealed layers for further interpretation which could otherwise be hidden. It revealed the complexity of her sonic signature, I argue. And these sound-based images allowed me to travel to her experiential world. I took this attentiveness with me when I listened to the complexities of exhaustion, of hope and despair, and attempts to conduct care among family caregivers. And so, I will argue that this dissertation has three main contributions. The first is empirical. The dissertation contributes ethnographic insight into life as a caregiver during a major global crisis, as well as still ongoing societal changes related to the reorganization of the Danish care infrastructure, both studied in real time as they unfolded. The second is theoretical. With the concept of imaginal worldbuilding, I aim to contribute an anthropological, phenomenological interpretation of the imaginal, as well as stressing the potentialities of focusing on processes of holding on when studying caring efforts that open up. Finally, yet something I'm equally passionate about, is contributing to methodological innovation by seeking to expand the attention to the potentialities of sound and reconfigurations of ethnographic presence. In addition, the issues explored in the dissertation are still of acute societal importance. Dementia is yet again discussed as the Danish government continues to stress the inclusion of care, of relatives in care, a tendency we also see in many other welfare state contexts around the world. For example, a plan for so-called healthcare packages has been presented. These are ways of prioritizing and structuring care and treatment for specific conditions in Denmark. It started with cancer and is now being introduced to other conditions and diseases too, but not dementia. This is surprising as dementia is, as described, a condition that makes life highly difficult and unpredictable for both people with dementia and their caregivers. So images of what care should be in the future is colliding, and individual well-being and family lives are unsettled. A new world of welfare and healthcare in Denmark and beyond is in the making.